Well, thank you again for coming and staying with us for the second annual Genocide Prevention, Remembering Rwanda Voices Then and Now. I think when we started yesterday, those who had a chance to see the beginning and the lighting of the flame and My Neighbor, My Killer, the movie, and today we started out with some kind of difficult to answer questions, and I was very pleased to see how everybody felt like they had something to say. I love that very much, because the whole point is, this is not about Rwanda as such. It's Rwanda as a working tool. It's Rwanda as, what do we learn about this and what do we want to do about it, and how us as human beings can be involved and put an end on this and really mean it when we say never again. And so I like the energy. And what we're going to be doing right now with our next speaker, Dr. Derek Hudson, who's from the Department of African and African American Studies, we are going to even get into more difficult questions as far as really when we want to be involved and we want to talk about what happened. What does that look like when it gets in the mindset of people who make the decision that affects all of us? Right now, we're going to be talking about the U.S. foreign policy, and what does that have to do with Rwanda? You as Americans, or you who have been living in America, you who go to school in America, where was America, the government, when that things was happening? And for people who are mind readers, like Dr. Hudson, who read the minds of those decision makers, what is he going to tell us about what we don't know? When I was sitting down there and hoping someone would do something, and nobody did something, when my neighbor did do something, but I was hoping that I would see the Marines or whatever, something big, to kind of say stop, or jam that radio, the Radio de Mille Collines. It didn't happen. What was behind that? So that's the kind of discussion we're going to be having with Dr. Hudson. And without further ado, I am giving the podium to Dr. Hudson. Please welcome him.
Good morning. Oh my goodness, good morning. I know that we are a small group, but it's really an honor for me to be here. Just listening to my sister just now, just saying, she was in Rwanda this week in 1994, and no one came. So on one level, I'm just really recognizing how sobering this is to have a conversation like this, but how important. So I'm really honored to be here. I hope I can shed a little bit of light on a different angle entirely. I'm not going to be talking about the genocide per se, although of course it will be part of the drinking water, as one of my colleagues says. I'm going to be talking more about U.S. foreign policy, because I'm going to assume that most of us in this room are American citizens, and we vote, or we should vote. Maybe that's one lesson that we can walk away with, that we need to make sure that we vote during every presidential election. And how could when you make a decision to vote, can you be more informed about how to choose a leader and how they will process, how they make decisions about U.S. foreign policy? So that's what I'm going to attempt to do in my time with you. I'm a pretty interactive teacher, so I'm actually rather encouraged because our group is small enough. You all are getting ready to make a policy recommendation in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to break you up into about 4 or 5 groups, and I'm going to have you all choose the policy recommendations that were on the table in front of President Bill Clinton in April 1994. So I'm going to get to my slides in a moment. But let me just sort of first read to you leading up to. So I am going to take you right away to May 1st. It's quite interesting. The date that I'm communicated to you, May 1st, 1994, which of course, you all know, the genocide, quote unquote, officially, it sounds almost blasphemous to even use a word like this, began this week. So a month later, first point I'm trying to make, a month later, a memo appears on President Bill Clinton's desk, and all of his senior advisors, people like Anthony Lake, United Nations, Kofi Annan, all these actors had been talking and talking, Madeleine Albright, and they had finally put together a memo that is now on his desk on May 1st of 1994. And so I'm going to read it to you. I think it's worth our time to hear the entire memo. It's a little lengthy, but I'll try to make it as animated as possible. When I'm done, I would like to pass out some handouts for you all to make a policy recommendation. Does that make sense where we're going? Okay. From the senior staff, the topic, War and Possible Genocide in Rwanda, May 1st, 1994. The issue, hundreds of thousands of people are dying in the war in Rwanda. Many of the people being killed are from certain ethnic or political groups. In addition to those who have been killed, 2 million people are now refugees in other countries, and 1 million people are displaced within Rwanda. Background. The history of Rwanda is one of conflict between two ethnic groups, the Tutsis and Hutus. The Hutus were traditionally farmers, while the Tutsis were nomadic cattle herders. For centuries, the two groups lived in the same area, but rarely intermarried. Because they owned cattle, the Tutsis were wealthier and better educated. I want you to bear in mind what I'm doing with you. Pretend that you're Bill Clinton. This is the memo that he is reading on May 1st, 1994. So try to put yourself in that space. Let me go on. In 1915, Belgium took control of Rwanda and its neighboring country, Burundi. The Belgians reinforced the class distinction between the upper-class Tutsis and the poor, less educated Hutus. The Belgians gave local political power to the Tutsis, virtually shutting the Tutsis out of the government. This happened even though the Hutus far outnumbered the Tutsis. Eventually, Belgium was forced by the United Nations to give up most of the governmental power to Rwandan citizens. In 1950, the Belgian authorities attempted to institute reforms in the Rwandan government that would encourage more democracy among the two classes, but many Tutsis resisted. With encouragement from the Belgian military, Hutus revolted in 1959 and attempted to overthrow the Tutsi government. For the next few years, many Tutsis fled the country because they feared for their lives. In the early 1960s, the UN terminated Belgium's control of Rwanda, and the country's first president and National Assembly were elected. The country held its first democratic election, and the majority Hutu population elected a Hutu-controlled government. Over the next few decades, many Tutsis who feared persecution by the Hutu government left Rwanda to live in neighboring countries. Even though the Hutu government had many positive goals for the country, corruption became a problem. In 1973, the military dissolved the National Assembly and took over Rwanda's government. The new president was Major General Habyarimana. Over the next 12 years, the president was reelected several times, once because he did not allow any other candidates to be on the ballot. You should be feeling overwhelmed now. It's the first time he's seen this memo, May 1st. Let me continue. In 1990, many Tutsis who had fled Rwanda banded together to form the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Their goal was to fight the government. But by the time the Hutu government had begun portraying the Tutsis who had not left Rwanda as being sympathetic to the RPF's efforts to overthrow the Hutu government, the president's government spread propaganda stating that all Tutsis were enemies to the Hutus. Then, after 2 years of fighting, a ceasefire was signed. In 1994, an airplane carrying both the president of Rwanda and Burundi was shot down, carrying both presidents. Immediately, the Rwandan military blamed the Tutsis for the death of the president and began killing Tutsis. Pretty complex. The current situation. Rwanda is in a state of chaos. Reports state that Rwandan government officials have been urging Hutu civilians to kill all Tutsis they can find. Government officials have been rounding up Tutsis and taking them to central locations where they are killed. The government has also distributed weapons to civilians and has been rewarding and promoting those who kill Tutsis. In newspapers and broadcasts, the government is encouraging people to kill Tutsis. President Bill Clinton is concerned about the situation in Rwanda, but does not want to get involved in another situation like Rwanda. The U.S. recently, now I'm sort of paraphrasing a bit, the United States recently sent peacekeeping troops to quell internal clan fighting in Somalia. Unexpectedly, several U.S. soldiers were killed by angry Somali mobs who resented U.S. interference. President Clinton is hesitant to call what is happening in Rwanda genocide. The systematic killing of a group of people based upon their ethnic backgrounds. If President Clinton begins to use this word, there will be greater public demand for the United States to take action in Rwanda. There's the key word, genocide. Now, the decision, the Clinton administration is feeling enormous pressure to get involved in Rwanda. The UN assistance mission in Rwanda is running low on supplies and personnel and cannot act to stop the killings because it is only a peacekeeping force. Okay? So they don't intervene, they just stop people from killing each other. That's the point there. The UN is demanding action from powerful countries such as the US to provide money, to aid the refugees and internally displaced persons, and to stop the fighting and killing in Rwanda. President Clinton is also feeling pressure from some of the American people. Many people who know about the events in Rwanda believe that the killings are genocide and think the U.S. should send troops to Rwanda and force the Rwandan army to bring the killing to an end. Other Americans are against getting involved in Rwanda. Many do not want more Americans killed, as they were in Somalia. Some groups are also concerned with the cost of a military mission in Rwanda. National Security Anthony Lake believes the United States should not get involved because we cannot solve another country's problems. He does not think that intervention in Rwanda will end the conflict there. And your question in the next 10 minutes is, what should the administration do? So I'm going to break you up into about 3 or 4 groups. I'm going to have 5 recommendations on the sheet. We'd like you all to huddle together, and then I would like a spokesperson to offer a policy recommendation. Okay, so can I have you all break into 5 groups? I'll sort of let you all sort of self-select, so I'm highly interactive. I'm going to walk away from the mic now. Okay, so I need groups of people to come together. But I don't want my voice, just like my sister said, to be the only voice in the room. So I would like to hear, try to pretend that you now have to make a recommendation to the President of the United States what to do. So I would like a spokesperson from each group just to stand or just share. Nothing too elaborate, just 1 or 2 minutes. I just want to kind of hear maybe how you came to a decision. So I'd like to just start with this group right here. And this gentleman here, here's the mic.
Thank you. I'm Samuel Todd. First thing we did was look at the best choice and the worst choice. And our group, we chose the number one choice would be number 2, which is we should wait on the UN and have a collective effort instead of just the U.S. having the whole burden and the cost on their shoulders. We feel like the U.S. would have more respect if we go in with foreign troops instead of if something happens and everybody blaming on the U.S. And like they said, the cost would be lower. So the UN would be the best choice because we have a collective effort. Our worst choice would be number 4, which we don't do anything. And the conflict would never be solved and it probably would grow greater. From there, our number 2 choice was the Clinton administration should not send troops, but should send aid to the refugees and internally displaced persons. We still kind of had a conflict with that because it's not going to stop the fighting, and it could cause even more problems. Our third choice was, which is kind of a bad choice also, the Clinton administration should wait until the fighting is over, which is the last one, and provide aid to Rwanda. The fighting probably will never end, so waiting until the fight over means we'll never send aid because the fight will never stop. And which one did I miss? And our 4th choice is the top one. The Clinton administration should immediately send troops. That was definitely crazy because we're just like what happened in Somalia. We went in there and thought it was going to just be a walkthrough, and you see how many people's lives we lost. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, our next group.
Hi, my name is Tanisha. Boy, I don't need to speak that close. Okay, so our group decided that our first choice, our top choice would be that the Clinton administration should immediately send troops into Rwanda to enforce and to end the conflict, and you know the rest that goes with it because you can read it. In combination with number 3, that the administration should also that they should send troops, but our thing was that we wanted to send aid as well, and those troops will protect those people that are handing out the aid. The reason why we chose these is because if you skip forward to the ending of his presidency, we ended in a surplus and not a deficit. So we had more than enough money to be able to go over to Rwanda and save these lives of these people that were exterminated for no particular reason at all. And I know most people, they would say, well, why else should we have to rush in? If we had the resources to do for these people what we could have done for them before the genocide took place, why shouldn't we step in? And I know that, we have been, the peacekeeper for how many years now, and everything seems to fall on our shoulders, but that's what neighbors are for. You see somebody falling down, you run over, you help pick them up. So our thing is, we should have helped these people, and right away. We shouldn't have waited. So that was our thing.
Thank you. All right, let's hear from the next group. So right now we have number 1 and 2 of the top choices.
All right, I'm Matt. We agreed with group 1. We decided to go with the second choice, which was we'll wait till the United Nations goes in there and we'll just follow their plan, because basically the United Nations as a whole can come to an agreement, all the countries together, they can all find their agreement, and we can follow that plan that all the nations came together with. Our last choice, because we kind of did the same thing as group 1 too, is we did the best and the worst case. Our last choice is actually the first policy, which was we should immediately send troops. Just because, like what our presenter was talking about earlier with the things that happened in Somalia and the other things, don't really know how that could go. They could turn on us. It could be worse than us going in there and waiting until the UN does things. Our Our second choice was the administration should not send troops, but we should send aid. We believe that the aid was the big part. They definitely need aid if we can't do the troops right away. Because like the second group said, we did have a surplus, so it was always good to have that if we could send the aid right away. So, yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, couple more, all right.
I'm Ryan. First priority was the second one, where the Clinton administration should wait for the UN to send troops to Rwanda. The main reason we picked that is because, as you know, the American public doesn't always want a war, and by sending U.S. troops and equipment, that would probably upset the American public a lot. But we thought that was the best choice. The worst choice we thought was number 5, where the Clinton administration should do nothing. And I think that's basically what they did, is sat by and watched. And I just thought it was interesting that the Clinton administration did nothing while this was happening, but thousands of miles in Kosovo, it's pretty much the same situation, except not as bad. So I just thought it was interesting that the administration sat by and did nothing, while in Kosovo, they were at least helping them militarily and with airstrikes, and I'm pretty sure they had like special forces people on the ground too, but not like troops and brigades of troops. But the second best option we did was the Clinton administration should not send troops, but send aid to the refugees. And that's really important because there's tons of people that are being displaced because of the fighting and leaving the war zone with pretty much no place to live. So setting up aid and refugee camps would definitely be a great option without sending American lives to be possibly killed. Number 3 was the Clinton administration should immediately send troops to Rwanda. And we thought that was kind of right in the middle, just because the situation was very serious, and sending troops in would probably help quell the genocide. But then again, sending a lot of troops in would upset the American public a little bit. And lastly, number 4, the Clinton administration should wait until the fighting was over to provide aid to Rwanda, which is probably not the best thing to do, because if we just wait for the killing to end, a lot more people will be killed, and then it's just kind of ironic to help them at the end when everyone's dead. Yeah, and that's it. That's what the group thought.
I'm Karen, and our spokesperson will come after me. But I do want to say that we have somebody in our midst who has been on the ground there, and so our discussion was influenced by that experience and by what was suggested could have happened that was not going to the extent of sending troops in, but first our decision.
Well, so our out of these choices, our best was the first one, that we should just act. I know everyone's like, no, you should wait for UN to go in, but it's, well, wait. By the time something happens, it's already done. It's countless times through history we sit here, we take our history class and we learn about these mass genocides that happen, and we're always like, wow, that's horrible, someone should have helped. But when we get to a point where it's actually, let's help, it's not, let's help. Like, what if someone would have taken action during the Spanish Inquisition or World War II or anything like that? Countless lives could have been saved. So this is a point where, yeah, we could lose some life, but we could save much more. That was kind of our decision.
One more. Okay, one more back here. And who's the?
Hello, my name's Ben. We chose the first one as our best option. The Clinton administration should immediately send troops to Rwanda and force an end to the conflict. We chose this because we feel that the U.S., as the most powerful nation, should step in and help a country in need. And as our last option, we chose the Clinton administration should do nothing. We felt this was the worst option because it would look very poorly on the American society if we just didn't do anything at all and just let the genocide in Rwanda continue.
All right, thank you for doing that. I'm going to give out some of these handouts at the end. It's about 5 after 12. So if you do want my handouts, I'll leave them here. So kind of in the interest of time, let me read the official response. So the overwhelming majority of you seem to be choosing options 1 or 2 at the very top of the page. Here's the official response: do nothing. The Clinton administration did not want to repeat the fiasco of intervention in Somalia when U.S. troops got caught in fighting. The administration also felt the United States had no interest in Rwanda, a small Central African country with no minerals or strategic value. In May of 1994, U.S. Representative to the United Nations, Madeleine Albright, delayed a vote by the United Nations to send troops and equipment to Rwanda, partially from the United States because she was concerned about the costs. In the end, the Clinton administration decided not to send any troops, either alone or with the United Nations. Because the murders were carried out with the support of Rwanda's government's military and administrative systems, many Tutsis were killed. In 100 days, almost 1 million Tutsis perished. The RPF fought against the Rwandan army throughout the country for several months. In June of 1994, French troops landed in Rwanda on a peacekeeping mission. The troops slowed the fighting in the south of the country and tried to stop the killings. This helped the RPF to quickly defeat the Rwandan army, which fled to the neighboring country of Zaire, which as you now know is called the Democratic Republic of the Congo, followed by 2 million refugees. Many of the refugees were Hutus concerned that Tutsis would try to seek revenge for the killings carried out by the Rwandan military. About 1 million other people fled their homes but did not go to other countries. After the RPF forced out the Rwandan army, the fighting and killing stopped. Once the fighting was over, the UN sent troops from Ethiopia. Many nations, including the United States, were surprised to learn that so many Rwandans had been killed and displaced. After the fighting ended, the Clinton administration started providing aid to the refugees and displaced persons. The UNAMIR remained in the country for 2 more years, rebuilding the country and helping people affected by the war rebuild their lives. The United States was one of the largest contributors to these efforts. And finally, on a 1998 visit to the Rwandan capital, Kigali, President Clinton apologized for not acting quickly enough to stop the killings or immediately calling the crimes genocide. UN Secretary General Kofi Annan also apologized in 1998 for not helping to stop the killings. So that's what happened. So, we are a very difficult spot. You all seem to be very unequivocal about that we should have acted, but yet we did not. I have about 35 minutes later. I teach African politics. I'm a political scientist. And so when I did a talk last year during our first annual Rwanda conference, I did a short blurb on U.S. foreign policy. And I just felt very convicted that what I think might be helpful to all of us as we're thinking through these issues, it seems like most of us get it, that we need to act. But our policymakers felt otherwise. So I want to offer 2 or 3 ways in which you might process as you vote at the next election and the one following that, and the one following that, for your representatives in the House and Senate, for our president, to have the sort of political will to make the kinds of decisions that you all seem to think needed to be made. Does that make sense? So what I have up here, and I kind of apologize, this is not as clear as I thought. I'm trained in international relations. I'll have these handouts again as you leave. And so I think a lot about things like the national interest. And so it was clear that when Clinton and Madeleine Albright and many others were thinking about the national interest, it was a more narrow definition. I could suggest to you that the national interest revolves around three themes: ideology, economics, and security. So let me say those again. Ideology, economics, and security. And what I have up here is a slide that I often use when I teach international relations theory, that most US presidents revolve around two themes: the realist lens, like realpolitik. Is it in our national interest militarily to intervene or not in other countries? And it's a very narrow definition of the national interest. It sounds like most of you in the room are pluralists. That is to say, other things are also important, like humanitarian intervention, the alleviation of poverty, human rights, using other agencies besides the United States for us to promote our foreign policy objectives internationally. Does that make sense? And so I think that is profoundly important when you're thinking about who to vote for president. How that person sort of thinks about the national interest. Clinton, very interestingly enough, was trying to be a pluralist, but found himself stuck with an American public that was very gun-shy because of the recent debacle in Somalia. And so it just sort of seems to me it really is important that there has to be political will, both from the American public, from the American population, to help give our leaders the political will to do, quote unquote, the right thing, if that makes sense. All right? And so I'm going to scroll down here and just show you one of my major points I think that might be helpful to you. I love American history. I actually love American history, and I love U.S. foreign policy. And I would suggest to all of you that all U.S. presidents see through the eyes of four giants when they think about U.S. foreign policy. So I'm going to go through these very quickly. The first one is Thomas Jefferson. The second one is Alexander Hamilton. He's on our $10 bill. The third is Andrew Jackson, and the fourth is Woodrow Wilson. So I am notorious for my rabbit trails, so I'm doing a rabbit trail. So you might be thinking, why am I talking about these folks who are no longer with us? I do think that if you are thinking through these four giants, it will help you be better informed on how to make good decisions about who to vote for at the ballot box. That's my point, okay? The first one are Jeffersonians. I have some famous ones up here like John Quincy Adams, Dwight Eisenhower, George Kennan, J. William Fulbright. Here are the things that they like to do. Remember, Thomas Jefferson was a patrician Virginia farmer. He was trying to disentangle from the pettiness of European wars and whatnot. And so, a Jeffersonian tends to limit overseas entanglements. They tend to prioritize domestic reform, and they're very concerned about imperial overreach. A Jeffersonian, their essence is that our example should be more than enough. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to sort of weave here? This is a pretty abstract conversation, but my point is the people who make these kinds of decisions, I think, are thinking about these kinds of things. These are the things that run through the psyche of most Americans, whether they know it or not, is my point. So a Jeffersonian is not going to want to get entangled. Clinton was trying to play that role in 1994. You might remember he talked about a peace dividend. Does anyone recall that language after the end of the Cold War? So the view was that since we had defeated the Soviets, just our example would be enough to move the rest of the world forward, and that we should not entangle ourselves in other people's sovereignty. It's a very, very important concept when people are thinking about U.S. foreign policy, because again, the G word, genocide, is licensed to intervene. Does that make sense? That was the whole conversation that the recent President Bush had about Iraq. He had to sort of say to people that if the nation is not sovereign, then we are able to intervene. That's a very, very important conversation that must happen at the level of policymakers. So this is a very different kind of conversation we're having right now. That's what you're thinking about. That's why Madeleine Albright never used the word genocide ever at the UN. Because if she knew she did, then we would be obligated to intervene. So Jeffersonians are very gun-shy of getting intertwined. They dislike bloated military budgets, imposing American values abroad, and close alliances with foreign regimes. If I could read a classic Jeffersonian quote to you, it would be this: "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." That was Dwight Eisenhower, classic Jeffersonian, 1961. The next group are Hamiltonians, people like Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, Theodore Roosevelt, and the elder Bush. Hamiltonians like economic frameworks for prosperity. So their buzzword is economic prosperity. More free markets, more free markets, more free markets. That's Thomas Friedman. That's to a certain extent Fareed Zakaria. So the more economic prosperity, the better in the long run. And they feel comfortable promoting it. That's my point. Jeffersonians are very gun-shy about that. Hamiltonians say, definitely promote it economically. Because in the end, capitalism is the great equalizer, right? Thomas Friedman's "The world is flat," right? So their view is that we need to keep promoting economic prosperity. And again, if this seems sort of away from our conversation, I don't think it is. Because again, the challenge that Khadijah gave to me that I'm trying to help you with is how you process thinking about how our leaders process foreign policy decisions. So we have to have this conversation, I think. I do think so. It might seem a little bit kind of heavy right now, but I think it's a very important sort of conversation to have, because otherwise you won't know how to vote well. So Hamiltonians really believe in lots of economic free markets around the planet, and they feel very comfortable promoting those, all right? It's all their opening foreign markets for American business, realism regarding U.S. goals. And then there are the dislikes. They don't like to expend resources on humanitarian missions, undue focus on the domestic politics of foreign allies and international human rights watchdogs. So they tend to shy away from the political democratic conversation and promote the economic conversation. Does that make sense? All right. So a classic Hamilton quote: "One class of our citizens indulges in gushing promises to do everything for foreigners," right? Help everybody, while another class offensively reviles them. And it is hard to say which class more thoroughly misrepresents the sober, self-respecting judgment of the American people as a whole. The only safe rule is to speak softly and carry a big stick. Theodore Roosevelt. It's a classic Hamiltonian comment. That was the elder Bush. Who's our third giant that helps inform American foreign policy? Woodrow Wilson. I would argue Barack Obama is trying to be a Wilsonian. He's having a hard time doing that right now. Wilsonians, they are people like Eleanor Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Paul Wolfowitz. Some people might take issue with that from the World Bank, but I would put him in that category when he's doing well, and others. In contrast to a Hamiltonian, they promote democracy. They promote freedom. Hamiltonians promote economics. Wilsonians promote democracy. So they spread democratic values as a prerequisite for international stability, the United Nations, and human rights. This particular kind of person would intervene in Rwanda. A Wilsonian would intervene. People should not be dying, as this sister said. It is important to help people who are in need. Aren't we about freedom? Remember Nelson Mandela's great quote? 1994, it just dawned on me just today that during this month, later in the month, South Africa had their first democratic elections, April 27th, the same month. Talk about ironies in our world today. So when Nelson Mandela votes in his own country for the first time after being in prison, a reporter asks him a question. You should be so excited that your country is now free. Now, for those of you who had my class in Survey of African History, I always begin with this quote by him. He said, no, freedom is not just about casting off our own chains, but to enhance the freedom of others. That's a Wilsonian quote. That's a Wilsonian comment. Make sense? So it's very interesting to me that South Africa would be going through their first elections and Rwanda would be in their situation in the same time. So Wilsonians dislike being isolated. I have a typo here. Part of I didn't do spell check, so I wrote my own rule. Isolationism, that we should not, as Americans, constantly retreat. Remember, Americans have always traditionally been surrounded by lots of water, and we're isolated. So we tend to pull away from the world. That's a very Jeffersonian energy. Wilson saying, no, we are a major power. We are the 800-pound gorilla. So what we do matters, whether we like it or not. We cannot just simply stand by. If you want to say we're the leader, leaders have to lead. They have to paint the vision. It's not an option. You can't be the big 800-pound gorilla and then not lead. Does that make sense? So it carries a lot of responsibility. And that was part of what Wilson was about, because he came in to World War I because we were the major emerging power at that time. Wilsonians also try to be very ethical about not having alliances with unsavory regimes and making policies on narrow economic interests only. They're more concerned also with humanitarian interests. And there's a Wilsonian quote, let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and success of liberty. This much we pledge and more. John F. Kennedy, 1961. And you may remember that when he gave his inaugural address, that birthed the United States Peace Corps. So the U.S. Peace Corps was birthed out of comments like that, so that young adults like yourselves could go to graduate school and take all your knowledge overseas. Okay? All right, who's our last one? Andrew Jackson, our last image. William Sherman, George Patton, Jesse Helms, Ronald Reagan, and, if I may be so bold, our most recent Jacksonian, Sarah Palin. Yes, that's a Jacksonian image. So I'm trying to be very neutral as a political scientist. So what is a Jacksonian? Jacksonians are very unapologetic about being moral about our economic interests. They believe that we should flex our muscles when necessary. That's why we have a military. It is all about the nation state. Thank you very much. It's the only system we have. So we need to get out of denial about being do-gooders. That might be very difficult language for some of us in the room to hear, but that's what an Andrew Jacksonian image sounds like, right? So, Jacksonians like this sort of unapologetic defense of U.S. values. They dislike international treaties, the United Nations, undue concern with human rights and other countries' sovereignty, and erosion, and I add this morning, this is a very important concept, which I talk a lot about if I teach foreign policy courses, American exceptionalism. So some of you are nodding. This is a very important conversation that Jacksonians always try to remind us of, that America is an exceptional country. Most Americans, I would suggest, tend to not question that until they come into my class. Where does that come from? So because of that exceptional quality, as I say in my classes, we have to unpack that. But Jacksonians tend to not question it. Because after all, look what we have accomplished as the United States. So there's a sort of unquestioning sort of sense that Americans are exceptional people and we're an exceptional nation. All right, okay, all right, maybe I'll get some conversation from y'all in a minute. It's like I mentioned that in the Jacksonian quote, Americans love a winner. Americans will not tolerate losers. Americans despise cowards. Americans play to win all the time. That sound familiar? Yes, it does. That's why Americans have never lost, nor will ever lose a war. For the very thought of losing is hateful to an American. George Patton, 1944, at the end of World War II. So, that's my little vain attempt to give you the great giants that help inform U.S. foreign policy. So I just wanted to take the conversation in a little bit of a different direction. So what would be the challenge to all of you, or to all of us? In South Africa, as you all may know, after the elections in 1994, Mandela asked his good friend and colleague Desmond Tutu that when something as horrific as apartheid happens in South Africa, or something as horrific as what happened in Rwanda, there has to be a space of time, and it came up in the last session, of truth-telling. So there's an emerging sense now that when countries come out of tremendous conflict, they must spend time truth-telling what has happened before they can move to the next step to rebuild their countries. So what I have up here is a very short table trying to articulate the differences between restorative justice and retributive justice. And I might suggest to all of you that you be aware of if our political leaders can articulate the difference between those two types of justice. Because I think, I'm going to say a very sort of hard-headed thing here, human nature unfortunately tends to move to the lowest common denominator when it's ready. So if we don't want things to ever happen again, then we need to be very rigorous about understanding what justice is. So what I have up here are what are some of the differences between retributive justice and restorative justice. So I'll just read a couple of these to you and then maybe transition it to a few questions. How about 15 minutes left here? How is crime defined? In retributive justice, it's the breaking of laws. In restorative justice, is harm done to a person or people. So once again, let me read that to you. How is crime defined? In retributive justice, it's the breaking of laws. In restorative justice, it's harm done to a person or people. What is the aim of the court? In retributive justice, to punish the defendant or offender of the crime. In restorative justice, it's to restore the victim, offender, and community to pre-crime status. So as you may know, in Rwanda, they've been trying to have these kinds of restorative justice conversations since 1998 or so. And my point is, I think it would be helpful for us as the American public to become more articulate around these two types of justice, to help encourage our political leaders to also have the conversation and make the kinds of decisions that will help restore societies. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? Right? Let me read a couple more to you. What is the offender's role? To be judged guilty or innocent, punished if found guilty. In restorative justice, is to make it right with the victim and or the community. So if you've read Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, the great classic, when Okonkwo kills Ikemefuna, he is not punished in the way that we think about retributive justice. He is sent to the other community for 7 years to work, to restore him back to the community when he is done serving his time. Does that make sense? It's a very different way to deal with injustice. What is the offender's role? To be judged guilty or innocent, punished if found guilty. I already said, make it right with the victim and or the community. What is the victim's role? I'm sorry. Limited or non-existent. The victim in restorative justice gets to confront the offender. And finally, what is the court's role? To determine, Whereas the courts will determine guilt or innocence and impose punishment, and in restorative justice to help mediate between the victim and offender, and finally, what is the outcome, punishment, or reparation and reconciliation. And so, to kind of conclude and maybe have you all comment, I have here 3 questions. Which foreign policy giant would be open to pursuing a strategy of retributive justice, of restorative justice? 2, which foreign policy giant appears to have the most informed President Clinton's thinking about Rwanda? And 3, my final question, which foreign policy giant appears to most characterize our current President Obama's thinking on foreign policy? So I'm not going to answer those. I want you all to comment, reflect back, thoughts. Well, that's my presentation. I don't like to always give answers. I just have a few thoughts here and there. Hopefully this was helpful. Any thoughts, comments? There's a microphone here. I can give you the cordless mic.
I am so impressed and so loving this that my first comment, do you have another opportunity to offer this talk other than now? Do we have somewhere, or can I suggest that you have a course called U.S. Foreign Policy in Africa, maybe now in Rwanda?
Sure.
What do you all think? I am so pleased and so, do we have a round of applause around here? Come on.
Well, as you all know, for many of us who do work in restorative justice, transitional justice issues, South Africa is the sort of star case. So Nelson Mandela and the government of national unity in 1994, that's very important for his point, is that Mandela did not say that we had a government in 94. He said we had to wait another 2 to 4 years before we had a full election to restore all of the institutions, the political institutions, the judiciary, the legislature, and he turned to Desmond Tutu because Desmond Tutu and the South African Council of Churches, the parallel would be the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, had they done that in this country, they did not, had remained autonomous enough from the state, both during apartheid and during the government of national unity, and they had the moral authority to then say, all of the victims will have an opportunity for the next 2 to 4 to 6 years to tell their stories. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission began its work, I believe around 1996 or so. I do know what stands out in my mind. When I was there in 2001, they were at the tail end of their findings around land. So they had heard over 22,000 cases of horrific things that happened to their people. So you have the victims who had time to pull together themselves to simply tell their stories, and the offenders were granted amnesty, highly controversial. It simply meant that they would not be imprisoned if they would simply say, I did these things, and that they would be willing to sit down in the same space and hear the stories. So that's what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had to do for about 2 to 4 years, is to gather folks in churches, in restaurants, in warehouses, wherever, where victims and the offenders would be in the same place to hear each other's stories. So, Dr. Ray is right. This is a very long process, but Mandela thought it was important enough because, as a political scientist, my hard hat is that all of the institutions that make up a nation state were corrupted. They were illegitimate. So there needed to be time to cleanse them out. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but that's the process. So my point is, in terms of foreign policy, we need to get more rigorous about, unfortunately, if it does happen again, we need to be able to better articulate and communicate with our leaders about doing stuff like that. Because it's going to come up again. The next one, unfortunately, is Sudan. I'm sorry to say it, but that's the next one, is Sudan. So the elections next year, in my mind, as a political scientist, are not going to go well. So we need to have foreign policy folk who know how to communicate it to us, and we back to them to give them the political will to do what needs to be done in Sudan, which is coming up next. That's my response. I'm not sure if I answered the question. Yes?
One question there, I have another one.
I have a quick question, maybe for you or for all of us, where I never get the answer by myself. I'm originally from Africa, and most of African countries are independent since 1960s, around that. But I would say it's on the paper. African continent, they are so rich in resources, where if it's not a war, if it's not hungry, poor people who never want to get away from the power, we will not be a poor countries. But as they say we are independent, and talking about the US foreign policy and the UN, where the countries cannot decide by themselves, and some UN countries, they have power, and because of their interest on those countries, those people, they choose the president they want, who can stay for life. How can we be independent in Africa in the future? Because right now we are not independent, it's just in the paper. Like here some decade ago, where they say black people are, they have their right, but they are not. It's the same thing we are going through in Africa. And if you are getting too much, You know, there will still be the war, some people will still be killed. And those people have power. They are covered by some country of the UN. Say, stay there. If you kill them, they will back up. How can we be independent one day? Thank you.
Yes.
Kind of switch over to, instead of foreign policy of a nation, I think the UN should change their policy on how they deal with things, especially the UN troops that go in. I know numerous times, even Somalia, they were there before we were, Iraq, all over Africa. And I think the problem is they are, instead of helping the people, they just, I know the code that they go by is they can't engage in conflict unless someone shoots at them. But I think that's kind of a problem, because if no one shoots at them, but their African people are killing each other, and they really can't get involved. But if they change their policy to more of, okay, if someone's killing someone, but it's not involving us, we can still get involved militarily.
And I'm not trying to be the definitive voice here, but I know our time is almost up. I'll just say quickly, I think this point's very important about reform in the UN. Because I think Dr. Khadija said a minute ago that peacekeeping is something of an oxymoron. As peacekeepers just keep parties from fighting. They don't actually do anything in terms of peace building. So we need to really think more rigorously about the kind of power we want the UN to have in places like Rwanda, or the Sudan, etc. So it's that kind of thing. So, but I know our time is almost up. So again, thank you very much for having me.